All right. Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of React Wednesdays. My name is TJ Van Tol. I work as a developer advocate at Blues Wireless. And if you're new here, React Wednesdays, this is a stream we do every week, every Wednesday as it goes. And we bring in cool people from around the JavaScript, from around the React worlds. We invite them on, we talk to them, and they show us some really cool tech. So if you are new here, I'm going to go ahead and drop a link to the show in the Twitch chat. And if you're on YouTube, that's going to be down in the video's description. You can find information on upcoming shows. You can add the show to your calendar if you want to know when we're live, who we're talking to, all those sorts of things. But this week, we have a very exciting guest. I want to welcome Matt Perry to the show. Matt, welcome. How are you?
Thanks for having me. Yeah, pretty good. Thanks. Yeah, how are you doing?
I am doing good. Maybe you could start by just telling people who you are, why you're famous, all those good sorts of things.
Yeah, well, I know. I don't think famous is definitely... the name is famous, but it's not because of me, I'm afraid. I'm at, and I write animation libraries probably prolifically, you could say, at this point. I work for Framer, which is like a... trying to stay on message here, but it's like it's sort of a prototyping tool, but we'll see how that evolves in the future. But I write the animation library that powers the animations, so that's Framer Motion, and yeah, so it just means that you can go into Framer, design a what we call smart component, which is like a true React component, but you can just design it completely with a graphical editor, and then you can publish and import that into your Next.js project, and soon any other project that works with your URL imports. So Next.js 12 has just launched with this new feature, URL imports. So rather than having to go to npm, you can just like paste in a URL. So we give you a URL to your component that you've just designed, and all the animations will work, and you can use it in production. So from design to production.
So we'll get into you. I have questions about a lot of your animation libraries. First, I'm kind of curious, what got you into animations in the first place? Like what made animations like your thing?
I wanted to write a book originally about like the sort of the idea behind it was that I don't know why I did idea. It was an idea. It still is. The devices that we have our user interfaces on are getting like increasingly sophisticated, and the software and UIs that we write for them need to be of increasingly sophisticated fidelity. So it'd be no good having a like Retina display showing us like a DOS prompt. Like it'd be wasted technology. So what are, all the touch screens with the fidelity and the response rates that they have now. And my thinking was that you could see, especially like 7 years ago now, when I first wrote Pop Motion, that the quality divide between apps and websites is really like starting to show. And I wanted to write something I wanted to write a book to kind of inspire like web developers to write these like playful interfaces, like things that incorporate touch and spring physics and stuff. But as I was doing it, I was kind of like writing a lot of code that was then used in my examples, and I'd started noticing I'd had a library at my hands. So rather than carry on writing the book, I just wrote the library instead to make it like actually easier.
Book-driven development, right?
Yeah, exactly. I've never written a book.
That's great. The thing is too, it's funny because I wonder your take on this too, because I feel like a lot of web apps, I don't think to use animations all that much, whereas mobile apps, it seems to be almost like a given. Like sometimes mobile apps even overuse them, but they reach for animations for common things like navigating around the apps. And web apps, at least like your common ones, honestly, some of the big ones seem to avoid them. I'm curious, like, I almost wonder if that's like due to the platform, like historically, or it's just like a psyche like built into the web. Like we don't trust animations. I don't know. I'm curious your take on that.
I think there's some of those things that I think there's when animations are table stakes, as they are in like especially iOS, but as well increasingly Android, like to have these like really beautiful feeling, not just looking, but like feeling and responsive UX, your app has to be of that standard if it's going to get anywhere. And if it's not, if you can use that an app, like I've got a chess app, it's pretty basic, and it feels more like a web page, like a classic web page, and how flat it feels.
Yeah.
And you can tell that straight away. But the web gets away with it because the table stakes, there isn't the sort of water level is pretty low, and I think that is partly that we're working with something that's a little bit more abstracted from the processors, I guess, in a sense. Like we're using CSS, for instance, has a variety of layout engines. Some of these apps will be written without a layout engine. Like all of the, everything will be positioned, like how the layout will be created by the app developer. They might, I mean, not so much these days, you've got like Swift UI and stuff, but certainly like, 5-8 years ago, these things would all be, imagine like writing a website where everything's absolutely positioned or something like that. You're not given these libraries, but we've got so many different layout systems on the web, and they all cooperate with each other to some various degrees. And that's a hit to performance. So we just don't get that same access, I guess, to we're starting like in terms of performance on the back foot. So that comes through, like it's harder to come up with like a 60 frames a second animation. That's increasingly less true, but I think that's part of why we're at where we're at. Yeah, I mean, it's also because I definitely wouldn't say, the one thing that I used to think perhaps that it's never been easier in apps, apart from to do some like more layout animation stuff. When you've got control of the whole layout engine, it's trivial to do layout animations, but so that's one thing that is actually legitimately harder to do on the web. But on the whole, like it's just as difficult to do a lot of animations in apps. It's just that it's it's expected, so it becomes part of the budget, part of the project schedule, part of the the whole process.
Yeah. So I like the way you frame that. And so I guess to make things easier on the web, like this is where some of these libraries come in. So maybe you could like introduce us to what you have built. I know you just recently put one out there too that I know we want to talk about today.
Yeah, so I'll start like how it started was with Pop Motion, which you can still use. It's still like a perfectly, in fact, like at the moment, it's more like of a low level animation library where if you just want a spring that runs over time and outputs a bunch of values, and you can just put those values into anything 3D or whatever it is, then that's what that's for. Basically, it's like a headless animation library. But it didn't really. I mean, it definitely had users, but it never really got traction until I did Pose, which was like a declarative animation library, and the whole idea behind that was to make it like almost like a no excuses animation library. It was actually inspired by someone at work when they were looking at some code that I've written, and they asked me what a tween was. And a tween is like we just not so much used anymore, but like if you come from the Flash days, like what a tween is. If you ever use After Effects, you know what a tween is, and it's like from like interpolating between like point A, point B, these keyframes, and this is your tween animation sort of thing. And I just thought this is actually a great point. Like, why does anyone need to know what a tween is to animate something nicely? So, or a spring, even like what everyone knows what a spring is, but like when you ask someone to use a spring in animation, like that becomes like, do I have to know physics? Things like that. So the idea was that you could like just define these states, and when you go between the states, we'd figure out. I mean, it's completely configurable, but the Pose would figure out and have sensible defaults as to what a great animation would be for that transition.
Yep.
And frame of motion is essentially the replacement for Pose. So in my head, that's only 2 animation libraries at this point.
Yeah.
Even though, 3 technically, but really in my head, it's two kind of ethoses, I guess. And finally we have this Motion 1, which I just released, and that is more an exercise in taking the browser's native inbuilt technologies like WAPI and exposing them in a simple API, trying to squeeze out as much as we can from them, like add as many new features like independent transforms, spring animations, things that it doesn't support at all, but doing so in like the smallest file size possible.
Yeah, and I like to. I'll go ahead and link this up for people that are curious. And what I like to is one of the questions I was going to ask you straight away is like, well, why does this need to exist over the web animation API? And you actually have a really helpful documentation page that lists out like every reason, like in pretty good detail, which I appreciated, because it sort of made me like feel like this is almost like the jQuery of the web animation, because at the core it's not doing that much more than what the browser provides, but it's just evening out some things that are weird or unexpected, and having more of like just a lighter and easier API surface on top of it.
Yeah, exactly. It's smoothing out the way it's spec'd. Isn't necessarily the way that you might if you've used GreenSock or PopMotion or Anime. It's not how you'd expect an animation library to work. So there's a load of like helpers and things like, for instance, like you can interrupt an animation, or if you're animating X and Y and you want to just stop Y and then animate that in a different way, it will do that all automatically. And again, like it's not just the way that the API is, it's the way it's been implemented. So, this, man, like I couldn't believe some of the things that were cropping up in bug reports when I first was publishing these alphas and betas to my sponsors. Like there's a .finished promise that was spec'd years ago, and I thought that, and when you look at like can I use or whatever, it's got really good support, but there was a browser, it was like an Android phone released within the last year that didn't have support. It was running a version of Chrome that didn't have support for it. And I was just thought, well, I mean, on one hand, that's, kind of annoying, but on the other hand, that's a great example of where I can come in and like, rather than, because this actually spun out of writing a book again. Like I tried to write a book about native browser, like WAPI and how to use it and stuff. And I just started writing a library around it. But the finished polyfill is like a great example of like where we can add a lot of value and just smooth over it. But I haven't really thought about it as jQuery for WAPI though. But I really like the comparison.
I've got a good a new tagline for you. You can get that on the website.
I am actually going to do that. So yeah.
Well, I know you want to show some of this, so maybe this would be a good chance to, because I have some other questions. But if you want to just show off some of this, maybe
sure,
we can use that as a next step.
Get the screen up.
Yep, should be good.
Yeah. So we've got like classic div. I mean, if you've seen me show this off before, if anyone's watching, like I always use a box. In the HTML, I mean, it really is. I mean, it's got a class and a div. I think there's some. You look. I know it's a simple example, but I'd never said it was the finest code I've ever written. But there's no chance you're going to misidentify it, though. So we've got a class and an ID that says. So one of the nice. We've got to import it. So one of the nice not improvements, but differences, I guess, over this to. Oh yeah, the first thing you've got to do is install it. That's always the first thing. It's on version 10, but that's only because we were kindly given this this library package name. So version 10 is essentially like R1. I just rather start from there than like 6 or something.
I like it. I also noticed you grabbed the motion.dev domain, which is pretty slick as well.
Oh yeah, that was I wouldn't say it was a story, but yeah. I tried to get extorted for that, and
did you get it early on, like straight away, or did you have to buy it from somebody else?
Someone already had it. I didn't know who. I just got it in my head one day that I wanted the domain, and and then so I went on to the Who is, and one of the services I had it didn't tell you who it was, but you could send them a message.
Yeah.
And I said, oh, look, you're not using it. Would you sell it? And he was like, yeah, for a price. I was like, okay, well, here's a price. I gave him, but what I thought was like quite a generous offer. And he said, well, listen, I've turned down offers of more than 10,000 quid, so that's not going to cut it. I was like, well, I'm not paying £10,000 for a domain name. So so I said, but you should have sold it, basically. Like, that sounds like a good offer. You should have sold it for that if you're not using it. But he got back in touch like a few months later. He says, well, I can do it for like 1,000. I said, well, I wasn't joking. Like, that was my biggest offer. I said, so like, if you can take that, then we've got a deal. But luckily,
that's great.
Yeah, so it all worked out in the end. But then once you got that, and now I want nothing. I want the Twitter, I want the GitHub, but I have got the npm, and that's enough, I think. So the nice thing. So if you're using WAPI, one of the things that you've got to have is like a reference to the element. Whereas with Motion One, like the first, a little bit like jQuery, where you could. Man, I thought I was coming up with all these API niceties, but jQuery had made them.
jQuery did it. It's like the Simpsons meme. Like Simpsons always did it first. jQuery always did it first.
Yeah, this is almost embarrassing because like this is you can just do like a box, and you can say for instance we want to animate X 100. We could do that, and it would do it with some defaults as well. So we saw there. It wasn't like we made that a bit longer. Let's just do it for 1 second. So here's another one. So we've got selectors, independent transforms, and the duration is set in seconds. Which when we were developing Frame of Motion, we did actual user testing with developers and designers, and seconds just made people just prefer. Seconds. It's not like the techiest choice, but I really like it now, especially like aesthetically. So because you never really need like millisecond precision when a frame itself is 16, so you're already off by an order of magnitude there. So
I like it.
Yeah, so now that what that means is that if we I don't know why I keep bringing that CSS up. If we just get rid of that, and then this will probably lose. Oh, good. So if I've applied the styling, so that would have been. So if we have like 3 boxes and they'll all animate together, so you don't have to, if this is WAPI, you'd have to do another dot element call, or maybe like query selector all and iterate over them all. Now you've got 3 references to animations, because that's the other thing, right? If you do this will turn controls, and then we like start this in seconds.
Oh, interesting. So you're like returning some custom object that's aware of all of the elements you're controlling, more or less, or all the animations, I should say, you're controlling.
Yeah, because normally like a WAPI call to animate would make one animation that kind of like scrubs through like a bunch of things, but you can't. That stops you from stopping like any one or interrupting just one of those values. So you can't just say, like, if I've got opacity here as well, and I want to do that, well, what I can do is, instead of stopping all of them, I can make a new animation with animate box and just animate one of those properties. So X carried on animating, but opacity didn't.
Yeah, that's slick.
So that's kind of these are the things that really, like, they seem really minor. Like, of course it should work that way. Like, that's how I feel. But it's actually, these are the things to me that make this worth doing at all. Like, otherwise, I wouldn't have bothered, because WAPI actually has like incredible, like, for instance, if we do like background color now, even though in the, let's have a look what I've done. In the CSS, that background color is going to be like a CSS. No, it's not. No, it could be. Let's yellow. let's just take like var. Even though we're animating from a CSS variable, we can animate this to literally anything. Red, we can animate it to var. I assume there's a grid in there that I've left around. So HSLA, or if your browser started like supporting these new like lab color types and stuff like that, this would already work out the box. And the thing is, once you like every time you have like a new color type to support in the traditional JavaScript animation library, you have to figure out a new way to interpolate it. Or convert it to, well, what you probably do is convert it to RGB, animate through RGB, and then like bring it back out the other way. But all of that, every time you do that, it brings like extra bundle size, which it's in there already. It's in your browser, so you have best in class interpolation, and these CSS variables like. We don't need to read them to figure out, well, what is the CSS? Like in frame of motion, we have to literally go in if someone wants to animate to a CSS variable. And there's a whole bit of the script that goes, well, what is green? Like, let's measure it. Let's get the property from here. So all of this is bundle size, and there are also performance implications behind it as well. And this is how, but with WAPI, you get to avoid all that, which is nice.
Well, it's nice from a code sharing perspective too, because I've been in that. I've done stuff like this before where like to also have to hard code the same color in JavaScript and in your CSS as well, and any attempt to like get that value from JS is a hack and something you don't really want to do. So I actually didn't know that syntax worked, and that's pretty slick.
Yeah, it's quite nice because like it also means like any of these would work as well. So if I think this is going to work, but okay.
Like a CSS variable for like 0 or something.
Look like that. Let's just so that's about 0.5. Yep. So we've used the calc function, I guess. And so these expressions can be as complex as you like. It's still going to work. Like this could be a CSS variable, all of this. So so things like that are like, I think when you're used to using a JavaScript animation library, you start to behave as if these things like aren't possible. So you do get used to it pretty quickly. Like you'll never think even to use like a calc, or I mean you probably wouldn't use it like this, but you might use it to like min max or something like that. If it's width, like min max viewport height, you could start doing stuff like that. But when you like can do it, you start thinking, oh wait, like I hadn't even considered that I might be able to do it like this. And WAPI can really handle all of it.
So one question I have this isn't necessarily related to the library at all, but one thing I struggle with sometimes is whether I should do an animation that's driven by JavaScript or one that's just, because at least for simple animations, right, you could just add a class name that like triggers a CSS animation. So is there a line if you can do it with either, would you just do it in CSS? Do you how do you view that? Because I know like for like more advanced stuff, like there's a point where like JavaScript's the only way of doing it because you need to do some math or things like that. But I'm curious where you draw the line for that for your own stuff.
It depends how into. So for me, I almost always use JavaScript because of frame of motion. It's so easy to do. Whereas like this is like an imperative function call. It's kind of simple here, but you can imagine it getting entwined with your. It's not as simple for me. For me, it's not as simple as transition, like transitional, for instance.
Yeah.
But I think one good example is like when it gets a little. So two things. Like here we have X. But what we could have is let's do this. Let's do duration 5. But actually, I want this to hover. This is like a port, but I mean, let's say it's going to hover when we mouse over it. So if we get a, I wish this is where I want the. This is probably how the old.
You need the you need the ID back.
Yeah. Just do okay, so if we add an event listener now, which is like mouse enter, and then we could do like a hover effect here. So we could just do. You could actually go. If we took the event, because you don't have to use a selector. You could pass this a actual element.
Yeah, a node or whatever. Yeah.
But now I want to do scale 1.2, and when I mouse out, I want to do scale 1. Put it back to normal. And then you think, actually, oh no, let's just start with that. So you can see, in fact, if we also do like repeat, so this will just keep going. So now here's one thing that you can't, you literally cannot do this in CSS, which is animate the X, but animate the scale completely separately. So there's one thing that I could almost take for granted. Like I try and do this. Maybe I'll try and do this in CSS and hit the brick wall, and then I go, oh yeah, this is why I use like JavaScript animations, I guess. But the other thing that I like, and this is both in this and frame motion, but we get keyframes. Like you can just sort of like chuck them in this array and mix them in with the rest of the animations. So you can do like, I mean, this is going to be quite.
Actually, that's pretty fun.
Yeah, so you can see like now I'm mixing like the keyframe syntax with more traditional, because you can almost like see this as like this looks almost like CSS. It's a declarative statement of values, but here this is where you'd have to bust out like keyframes,
20%, 40%.
Yeah, exactly. The thing with that, yeah, exactly. Well, yeah, and I think they do get spaced evenly, perhaps if you don't give them anything. I can't remember, but and you can change this if like there's like a times array or something, or offsets. But yeah, offsets in this one. But yeah, like mixing all those things together, and then you've got dependency between the keyframes and the animation property, and these are separate now. So like if one just disappears and there's CSS, it might legitimately just vanish one day, then your animation's broken. So for me, I personally just stick with this, and it also means you can. I've always had trouble getting events like out of like to trigger, which in this case would actually be quite easy because it's a single element. But animation events bubble, and that means that if you've got like a whole tree of animations. If the children like fire their animation end event, then when it bubbles, you catch it in a pairing, which you're waiting for the animation end event for this one. You got to figure out, like, is this the right element? And it starts getting really complicated. Whereas if you just do like finished, or even this is, do we have this? Yeah, top level away. No. But if we wrap this in a function, but as it is, we can do finish then. And then you can do something else.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. I've commonly needed to do that. Like I can't do something until the animation finishes. And with CSS, there's really no way of knowing.
Yeah, I mean but what I bringing up jQuery, that's when you used to be able to like add custom labels to events, and so I'd end up like making it like a unique like a function that would generate a unique ID every time we applied an event listener.
Yeah.
So it would get really crazy. But with with JavaScript, it just kind of happens organically, I guess.
I think there's also like to me, it's hard to like animations almost seem like they belong more in JavaScript, because thinking more of like writing some of this code in like other languages, like you brought up like Flash earlier, like it's sort of where I'd expect to be able to control those sorts of interactions. Like CSS, almost it feels weird to me to put some of that information there, because it's more like behavioral, something that I'd expect with a scripting language versus like a language that's going to tell me how to like statically orient my components and what they look like and such.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I guess a great example of this is like, and we don't cover it in with Motion One, but exit animations in React. Like, you have the whole. If you try and do them yourself, like you've got to figure out when they finished and start wiring up events and start triggering state. It's like, so we're trying to remove the component, wait for it to animate out, then we set another state perhaps, or then say, oh, the animation's finished. Whereas my preference is the like completely declarative approach of having it like in frame motion as an exit prop. And when you remove the component, it will it's removed from the tree from your render, but we keep a little copy of it around while it animates out, and then we deal with the removal ourselves. So it's like completely like you are presented with like a styles or like a UI, UI logic. I guess it's not even logic. It's like it's a declaration. All the logic is hidden away, completely separate. Because that's kind of what that should be how the JSX kind of is. If you're like with a pure, like a nice pure view, and it's just an animation, like it's not part of. There's no wire. There shouldn't be any wiring to do, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. It's not what you want it to happen, but you don't necessarily want to concern yourself with it. You just kind of want it to do its thing.
Yeah, exactly. Like, and I think as well, it's not just that, but part of this whole exercise, and I think Motion One's like a bit of a blend of pop motion and frame motion in terms of its ethos of like if it's not super simple, like I want it to do as much as pop motion within the confines of WAPI, but if it's not super simple to do, people just aren't going to do it. So if we want like those user interfaces to get better, like on the web, then we need to abstract as much as possible away. And I know there's loads of people that have like different opinions about that, but this is a very firm belief. I think that this is the only way that waterline's going to like improve, because often people aren't given the time or the resource.
Well, I'm guilty of it too, because you get overwhelmed, like it, especially like if you don't have a design background. Like I feel like a lot of the sort of UI prototypes I'm given to like implement, they don't have animations, right? Like when I get asked to build a web app, I get set some assets in some Adobe something or whatever, but usually it's a static thing that I'm looking at, right? It's like, oh, build this. There's no like, oh, build this. Oh, and by the way, when you click the button, it should do this. And then this should, like, none of that is really a part of it. And it's sort of strange in a sense that we don't, because I have to imagine, I haven't done like native app development. I mean, I've done some, but not like high-end iOS or Android apps. But I have to imagine when those things are being designed, like that's actually a part of like the specs that they're writing up and such, just because it's considered core to what they're building.
Yeah, 100%. Like someone will have mocked up something in, well, I know this, like this is one of the use cases of Framer, and we put a lot of time because we know that app developers love to make sure that all of the animation settings are just so. And sometimes that handoff is like someone gives you a QuickTime file and you'll like scrub through and try and figure out the time to these occurs, and it's kind of useless. Or, you know, like you say, often you don't get anything like that. Like there's no thought behind the animations, and you know, you run the risk of then handing that off to someone like me who loves animations but is also a rubbish designer. And I remember like I was doing like a car website essentially, and when you selected like a thing from a menu, I made it I don't know if you ever used to play like Daytona or Sega Rally.
No.
So these old Sega Rally, so it was arcade races.
Okay.
When you like select something from the menu, like there was often like this flash, like this, and it would just flash on and off for like half a second, and then it would do the action that you'd selected. And it's just like select your like subreddit type menu, and every time you clicked on a subreddit style thing, it would like flash away, and then the whole thing would animate. It would like animate into the background. The whole menu would animate back up, and I'd spend like a week or 2 weeks. I mean, obviously the feature would get canned because that's the nature of front end. And that's the other thing. Like, it should be easy to just ditch. Like, it's not like if I'd done that now, I would have done it in like 30 minutes. Not even that.
Yeah.
And so if we ditched it, it wouldn't have been frustrating. I'd try it again later somewhere else. But when you spend a lot of time like wiring it all up, and then it's a source of bugs. And
I think that's a good argument in favor of JavaScript as well, just because it's easier to tinker with, and like, because chances are the first time you show your designer, your client, or your customer, just like they don't like the colors of your website, they're going to say like, I don't like the way that moved, or that went in too fast. And so being able to go in and go like, oh, okay, let me tweak this is kind of cool.
I definitely. I mean, I think it depends like what sort of developer you're. Like, I personally, I agree, and I find it much easier to tinker around, especially with React, because I'm basically almost a React developer at this point. Like, I think Motion One's fully JavaScript and stuff, but I don't know much about other Vue libraries. But I'm so comfortable in React that I'm almost more comfortable with that than I am diving back into CSS, which is almost sad to say, because being of a certain age, like, everyone has their stuff. Back then everyone had their start in like HTML, CSS, but for me, like, if I'm tinkering with animations, I'm much happier, because as well, you never hit that line. Like, JavaScript animation is a superset of CSS. So you never get that moment where you're like, oh, well, if I want to do it with a Spring, or if you want these two things to animate independently, or if you want to do X, Y, Z, I'm going to have to like kind of rewrite this and do it in JavaScript. You never get that the other way around. Like, it's not like I'm doing it in JavaScript and then, oh, you want this feature? Oh, well, for that, I'm going to have to rewrite in CSS.
Yeah, that's a good point. And actually, real quick, we had a question come in with chat. So speaking of Motion One, are there any plans for, really, I think this is getting at like, will Framer Motion ever use like Motion One in any way? Any plans for that?
Yeah, and it's a great question, because that is actually how, like, it already does that with Pop Motion. So if you want to lazy load the animation library, but this is something that I'm thinking about quite a lot, because I'm like currently writing a Motion One. I use a private Motion One for React, and that's like on the Motion One homepage, like all of this stuff. This is all React. Well, not all of it, but a lot of it. And if you go, I always feel guilty because I've got this like tiny React animation library, but I haven't published it, because if I'm going to do a React one, I'd rather do it with Framer Motion. But all of this in Vue stuff, like if this goes out, when you see they animate when you come in,
oh man,
and if I go away and it come back, all of that in Vue stuff was actually, I used that code for the in Vue feature in Framer Motion. So it's already started feeding back into Framer Motion. The problem is, like, it's almost like it's actually almost like a great follow-up to talking about that line and that line of capabilities, because there's certain things that pure JavaScript animation libraries like Pop Motion can do. There's some things that WAPI literally can't do, but I'll probably do like a deeper dive into this at some point, but like the overlapping things it can and can't do are not like, it's not like we've got like a checklist of things that Motion One can do and then a checklist of things that Pop Motion can do that's just longer. It's almost as if there's ticks and crosses in the alternative column, so it's not as easy as just swapping one out. Because like our example earlier of
while you're typing this, I just have to say I'm impressed that that animation on your homepage is actually an animation. I really did think that was like just some sort of image or video playing, and I've spent like the last 30 seconds like viewing source, and it's pretty impressive.
Oh well, oh cool, yeah, thanks so much. Yeah, that was a bit of an. The plan was to do like 3, and they'd like fade into the next one. And I ended up doing that one. I was like, I do actually have to publish this at some point. But this is a good example. Well, this is actually a poor example, but especially, oh yeah, because of resonance CSS. But if this was this is a poor example because in frame of motion we do like end up having code that will like read the CSS variable. But if this is like calc or something else, or like a transform, a complex transform, like where here's a good example of like this is something that frame of motion actually can't do. None scale to and so what we've got here, I'll slow it down so we can. So we're going through. So what we're doing, we're asking if this is a JavaScript animation library. We're saying take this string, animate it to scale 2, and then animate that string. So then it will go. Oh, actually, okay. So I have detected a number, so we can animate numbers. That's good. So this will be instant because there's no way you can animate between this. Or maybe it'll be like scale 0 to scale 2. So maybe you could make this work. And then you go, okay, scale 2 to translate X. Okay, well, I guess the number's there. So now I'm going to translate X from 2 to, do you know what I mean? Like you could do something like that, or you could convert it all to matrices and animate the matrix, which Greensock does, but at what cost? Like it's, it's processing overhead. It's and that's before you start. It adds kilobytes to the download, and this library is all about small stuff. So then you'd be left in a situation where what I'm saying is you can't just swap them out under the hood because you could. This is a benefit of like using Motion 1, but then when you come to frame of motion and pop motion, and you try and mix something like this with a pop motion animation, which could do a spring on a color, just for argument's sake, which Wappy can't do because in Wappy we can do spring animations, which is cool. But the way this works is X100 spring. The only reason we can do this at a reasonable cost. Let me go do that. Sorry. The only reason we can do it is because it's numbers only. So as soon as you start getting into all that crazy interpolation, like, between colors and transform, complex strings, you keep adding to the bundle size. And so you could almost say, well, what about have both? And then you've completely blown out the best part of only having Motion 1, which is a small bundle size. So basically the short answer is I'm trying to think of a way to do this. And I haven't got there yet, basically.
Yeah, I see what you mean, because it's not like a clear one or the other choice. Really, like sometimes you want one, sometimes you want the other, and presenting it under a cohesive API is almost like it's very hard to make decisions, because you're right that like string recognition is super powerful, but it's powerful because you're letting the browser do the work for you.
Exactly. Yeah. So that's I don't know, that's the best. Oh, there we go. I knew I've got something wrong, but so yeah, it works because this is just a number, but we can't do like anything more complex than that. So yeah, and there's other things where with Wappy and CSS animations, when you do an animation, you kind of like do it offline in a sense, realistically, you're doing it off the main thread, so other code doesn't have access to it. So we in frame of motion we have like an on update function that you can provide or not, but it will run every frame with the latest values. Well, you couldn't do that with Wappy because it doesn't pump out, and because it supports hardware acceleration for certain values as well.
So just so I understood that correctly, the web animation API, like built into the browser, is smart enough to like essentially run off the main thread for performance for hardware accelerations reasons. So basically, it makes your animations like more performant by nature in a way that's hard to, if not impossible, to replicate with like a custom animation library, because it doesn't have the benefit of running off the main thread. Is that more or less right?
Yeah, exactly. So you've got an on update, the capability to have on update in one hand, or the capability to have hardware accelerated animations in the other.
Yeah.
And there's no, this So these are two ticks, but they're in the wrong column. They're in like the opposite columns. So yeah, it'd be great. It would be amazing, but I haven't figured it out. Yeah, but although that you just reminded me, one of the nice things about this is like another one of those jQuery moments. We actually disable hardware acceleration across the board in Safari because the implementation is so buggy that if you were to use that with CSS, you'd be delivering all those bugs to all your users. So I've looked like into the source code and found a few triggers that will they don't provide an API for turning off hardware acceleration, but you configure your animation in a certain way that's not perceptible to people, and it will always disable hardware acceleration in Safari. So you can, the way I think of it is hardware acceleration is usually it's like a nice to have. And you can force it to unlock. I think there's a prop called like enable hardware. Is it like it's something like acceleration or allow? That's it. Allow WebKit acceleration. That's it. And then you can do true, and we'll take that off. But it comes with the caveat of like you better test this because we're not responsible for this. It just means that you can write these animations, and if you get that hardware acceleration, then that's great. And if you don't, then it's not going to be buggy. It's going to work. At least it's going to look good.
I will say too, you haven't brought this up yet, but another cool thing about this approach is I can tell you have like either TypeScript support or this is written with TypeScript, because like even in this JavaScript file, you've been getting code complete a handful of times, which is handy because I know, like, at least speaking for myself with some of these animation things, I oftentimes forget the syntax of like the animation properties in CSS. Like, I don't know how many times I've Googled like crap. It's like animation dash, like all the time looking that stuff up. So.
Oh, totally. Like before when the Spring wasn't working, it's because I had it as is, but because this was a JavaScript file, not a TypeScript file, like it didn't error.
It didn't error.
And I'm just so used to having error. Like I would never write a library public facing in anything else. Like it's it just makes it like refactoring is perhaps the main part of that as well. Like it would be impossible to refactor something in a code basis because like frame of motion without type checking.
Yeah.
I'd highly recommend it. I mean, I don't have any strong opinion on, how you make your own products, but if you're going to ship something that then gets consumed by another developer, you'd really do yourself a favor by using TypeScript. Yeah.
Had another question come in from chat. Can motion animate the scroll bar as well? Or are those APIs not mature enough?
Yeah, so no, basically. But we've got, so the way that this works at the moment, because we're in Chrome, this X is being animated by WAPI. But if we were in Safari, there's like a tiny numbers polyfill that will run it instead. And so it's compatible with everything that all the features we provide in Motion 1. This tiny numbers polyfill, it's like a kilobyte. But the size of the whole thing's like 3. So it is like I took a chunk just to put this in, but I felt like it was worth it because that will provide the basis of maybe a vanilla, like a vanilla number tweener that you could then pass your various interpolators into, like more of a low level thing. And that would be able to give you a function perhaps where you could write like a animate scroll thing with it. And it's just figuring out, I just want to come up with a nice API to publish that rather than like keep, I don't want like animate and then animate number. I want to expose it in a way that's like, I don't know, like that makes sense.
So not consistent yet, under the same API, just does its magic under the hood.
Yeah, exactly. And it's only because like WAPI doesn't, it's always like if WAPI doesn't do it, we don't do it. But if it's worth it, then we'll figure out a way to make it happen. For instance, like SVG properties, like attributes, you can animate a lot with SVG CSS, so stroke width, fill, all of this. So you can do it with WAPI. But I'm sort of thinking there's other things like the radius attribute in circles. I'm wondering if like maybe we do like a little dollar thing here, and then you can animate the radius, and maybe this is like a little signifier to say, okay, use the number polyfill to animate the attribute. So maybe it could be something, we have a special detection for scroll offset or something.
Yeah, I could see like almost like, well, like jQuery plugins, right? Like plugins into this that are like, we want to keep this thing as lean as possible, but we know this is common. So we're giving you some mechanism of bolting it on for those of you that need it.
Yeah, totally. Like I feel like I don't want anyone to be limited, but for me, like the file size is really like a big part of this, I guess. Keeping things code splittable as well. Or no, tree shakeable. That's what I mean.
Yep. Well, cool. We are getting a little bit close to the top of the hour. I'm going to encourage, if chat has any more questions, please get them in the next handful of minutes. We've gotten a few pretty good ones so far. And then Matt, is there anything else you haven't shown us that you've been dying to?
No, not dying to. I think if you go to the Motion One, what I will say is that the Motion One docs have like a bit more. So, for instance, there's the timeline function, which I didn't show you, but it's basically a sequence of animate calls that works a lot like the green sock timeline. So you can build up these animations step by step and adjust the way they're where they are in this sort of like the sequence. So yeah, there's stagger as well. So if you're animating like a bunch of elements, like before when we had the 3 boxes go, you could stagger those with the with this little stagger thing. But yeah, it's all there in the docs. The only other thing, it's actually not something I can show you, to be honest, but I have been looking at a Svelte integration. So for anyone who, I know this is React Wednesdays, but I'm going to be co-developing the new core of this for the one that I've got for my like sort of private like React library alongside this Svelte library. So hopefully there'll be like a way to use this in a nice way for Svelte users soon as well.
Yeah. Very cool. Yeah, I'm a Svelte fan as well. Actually, I think Svelte, when I used it, it's more similar to React than it isn't. So it's
it seems to be. Writing a library is sometimes like I've had to do a whole setup, and it's definitely more involved, I think, than React. But hopefully to use, it will be an API that's, like you say, it's almost identical to because like the JSX style syntax is, like you say, pretty similar on the whole, but we'll see.
Cool
if I can get it working.
Yeah. Well, I'm not seeing any other questions from chat, so I think the last thing I want to do is there any other like links we should give people? This is like the link dump part of the episode, so I'm going to throw the Motion website back in chat, and if you're on YouTube, that'll be in the show notes down there. Is there anything else, like if people want to follow you on Twitter, if they have any other questions, like what are some other good places to go?
Definitely jump into my DMs. I'm usually pretty good at answering people's questions, not always 100%, but my Twitter is Matt G Perry, and so if you go there, I'll be more than happy to answer your questions.
Cool. I will drop that in chat as well. Actually, we had one last minute question, so I'll allow it because it's a pretty good one. It's been following your animation libraries for some time, and I've always been impressed with your API design. So what is your process? I'm actually curious about this as well, because the Animate API you came up with is pretty slick.
It is. For me, it's mostly just realised I was showing off all my DMs there. I'm sure there's nothing like
your screen's set up. I hit your screen for you. I'm looking out for you, man.
Oh yeah, thanks, man. I like to have a clear idea of what the library is in sort of a design ethos kind of way. It's kind of like what I was saying at the beginning. So for frame of motion, I'll make decisions based on simplicity. So if someone comes and they say, I need this feature, or I need blah, blah, blah. If something can't be done without doing XYZ, then I'll do XYZ in a certain way. But I'm always trying to make it as simple as possible. Whereas with pop motion, the idea is to make things like your ability to do anything with it unlimited. So for that, it's composability. It's like how flexible can these values be? How well does it work with, like, can you use it to animate literally anything? And if you can't, then that's going to be a blocker for me. Or should I? Because for a long time, like, it didn't really take off until Pose. Frame of motion, so no one's actually used pop motion directly. It's always been through these like nice simple APIs, and that's almost to me like a validation of doing it the way I did it, because it's more about those low level advanced users who have like these edge cases almost. So for a long time it was like, should I make this? It's not, I'm not sharing anymore, but the animate function that we've seen, should I make something like this in pop motion, because it, like, maybe that will make it more popular, or maybe that will make it easier to use. And it's like, well, tying it to the DOM like that isn't part of the ethos of pop motion. So if I want to do that, or if someone wants to do that, it should be a different library. And that's kind of how it's almost like chess, like when you've got like a chessboard, like, and you're trying to think of your next moves, you've got to think like, what I'm actually doing here, what's the point of, what's the overall goal? And so if you've got like almost a strategy in place, I guess is the thinking, and a clear idea of the character of the library, then that's how I go about it, basically.
I'll say too, you have an eye for marketing as well, because I think you did a pretty good job with the motion site as well. So
oh, thanks so much. Yeah, I haven't designed anything for so long that that was probably the last I have in me. So for here, it's a
good note to end on. So
oh, thanks very much. I appreciate that more than like anytime someone said, "Oh, enjoy Lucy the library" or whatever. It's like, yeah, but and so anytime someone said something nice about the design, I'm like, oh, thanks.
You could put me on as a, like, give me a quote on the website somewhere in the bottom with my face.
Yeah. I'll just put library shit, but the website looks great.
Yeah, exactly. That's all that matters.
Yeah.
It's with marketing anyways.
No,
well, man, this has been great. I really appreciate it. And I wish you the best of luck, because this is a really cool library.
Oh, thanks so much. And thanks for having me on. I really enjoyed it.
And yeah, I'll just remind everybody that React Wednesdays is something we do every Wednesday. We're actually taking next week off, but after that, we'll be back to talk about some VS Code extension stuff, which should be pretty interesting as well. So make sure to tune into that. And until next week.